Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into the world of translation today.
Oh, translation.
Yeah, you gave us quite a stack of academic papers
Quite a few, yeah.
with excerpts from Translation,
Yeah.
an advanced resource book. That's by Basil Hatim and Jeremy Monday
Okay.
at the top of the pile here. And we're going to help you sift through all this, really grasp what matters.
Sounds good.
You know, forget about simple word swaps. We're talking about
Yeah.
language, culture, maybe even a little
Mm.
dash of ideology.
You know, it's funny because translation is something we encounter every day.
It is, yeah.
I mean, books, movies,
Oh, yeah.
even just like a takeout menu
Right.
with, questionable English.
Yeah, yeah.
But how often do we actually stop and think about the process?
Not very often. Not very often.
Right.
So we're here to do that.
Yeah.
So before we jump into the deep end, let's start with the basics. What exactly is translation?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, Roman Jacobson, who's considered like one of the founding fathers of the field,
Oh, wow.
he defined it as an interpretation of verbal signs
Right.
by means of some other language.
Interpretation. That's an interesting word choice.
Yeah.
It suggests there's more to it than just finding a word.
Yeah, it's not just about equivalence.
Yeah, yeah.
He argued that there are actually 3 different types of translation.
3. Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
All right, so first there's intralingual translation.
Okay.
And this is basically rewording within the same language.
Okay.
So like imagine trying to explain quantum physics to a 5-year-old.
Oh, right.
You're essentially translating the complex into the simple,
Right.
but you're still working within the same language.
Interesting. So even paraphrasing
Yeah,
could be considered a form of translation.
absolutely.
That's cool. What about the other 2?
All right, so the second type
Yeah.
is what most people think of when they hear the word translation, interlingual. And this is where we move between 2 different languages, so English to Spanish.
Right, right. Mandarin.
Mandarin, exactly.
Okay, makes sense. And the third type, you mentioned things could get mind-blowing.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. It's called intersemiotic translation,
Okay.
and this is about shifting between different systems of signs. So think about adapting a book into a film.
Oh, wow.
You're taking a story told in words,
Right.
and you're translating it into a story told through images and sound.
You know what? That's really interesting because I was just reading about that new Dune adaptation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and thinking about it as a form of translation, it makes you realize how much creative interpretation goes into filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it also makes you wonder if a movie is a translation of a book.
Mm-hmm.
Can it ever be truly faithful to the original?
Oh, that's a big question.
It is. What gets lost? What gets gained?
Those are great questions. And those questions get at the heart of why studying translation is so important. It's not just about linguistics. It's about understanding how meaning
Right.
is created and conveyed
Yeah.
across different forms of expression.
Yeah.
And it makes us consider the implications of those choices.
So we're not just talking about dictionaries and grammar rules here. We're talking about
Culture?
culture, yeah.
Yeah.
Interpretation, maybe even a little bit of artistic license.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that brings us to the more practical side of things.
Yeah.
What do translators actually work with
Mm-hmm.
when they're trying to bridge these linguistic and cultural divides?
Yeah.
It's not always as straightforward as, like,
Right.
just finding an equivalent word in another language.
No, definitely not.
You know,
Right.
like you're reading something in another language,
Right.
you kind of get the gist,
Mm.
but it just doesn't sound natural.
Exactly. And that's often because the translators stuck at the word level instead of thinking about the bigger picture.
Right. And this is where this concept of the unit of translation comes in.
Okay, let's unpack that. What is a unit of translation?
So think of it like a puzzle piece. Sometimes the piece is a single word, but sometimes it's a phrase or even a whole sentence that represents one single idea.
Okay.
Vinay and Darbilne.
Okay.
They gave this example.
Yeah.
Simple soldat in French. The equivalent in English is private.
Okay.
You see how it's not a one-to-one word match, but it conveys the same idea?
Right. So it's about finding the right chunk of language
Yeah.
that fits
The context. Exactly.
rather than getting hung up on individual words.
Individual words, yeah.
Yeah.
And the source material actually has a really great example of this. There's a section about the challenges of translating the Spanish word brote.
Brote. Okay.
In English, it could be outbreak. It could be budding, sprouting, or even rash, depending on the context.
That one word can have so many different meanings.
I know. It's like the translator needs to be a detective.
figuring out the most appropriate translation.
Right, based on the clues
Yeah,
in the text.
exactly. And this leads us to the central tension in translation,
Okay.
the quest for equivalence.
Oh, here's where it gets good. Equivalence.
The big question is, how do you find equivalence between languages that have different structures, different ways of expressing things, even just different cultural assumptions baked in?
It's so true. I remember when I was studying abroad,
Oh, yeah.
I was trying to translate slang. Like, it was impossible. It
Yeah.
was like trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
You can't, yeah, and that's the thing. Perfect equivalence is often impossible. So different approaches have emerged
Right.
to tackle this challenge.
Okay.
One really influential figure is Eugene Nida.
Okay.
He was very involved in Bible translation.
Okay.
He came up with this idea of dynamic equivalence.
Dynamic equivalence. So what's that all about?
So dynamic equivalence is about prioritizing the impact on the target audience, even if it means moving away from the literal form of the source text.
Gotcha. So it's about capturing.
Its spirit,
Yeah.
the essence.
Rather than getting bogged down word for word.
Word for word, exactly.
Okay, so less about finding a direct linguistic equivalent.
Uh-huh.
More about conveying the intended meaning.
Yes.
In a way that resonates with the reader.
Exactly. And he gave this great example of the Greek word gunai in the Bible. Older versions translated it as woman,
Okay.
but newer ones use mother.
Mother, okay.
Which reflects a shift in understanding the word's more positive connotations.
Right, because mother carries like more emotional weight than just woman.
Mm-hmm.
It changes like the whole feeling.
It does, the text.
Yeah, it does.
But wouldn't some people argue that that's changing the original meaning?
Well, yeah. And that's where this whole debate around loss and gain in translation comes in.
Right, right.
Some people think that any deviation
from the source text is a betrayal, while others embrace the idea that translation inevitably involves interpretation and adaptation.
So it's not just about finding the right words. It's about making choices that shape how the text is received.
Yes.
And understood.
Yes.
It's a different language in a different culture.
Exactly. And those choices are always influenced by all sorts of things. The translator's own style, the intended audience, the broader cultural and historical context.
So it sounds like we're moving beyond dictionaries and grammar rules into like a much more complex and fascinating territory.
We are. And this is just the beginning of our deep dive.
I love it. Okay, let's keep going.
Right.
We've been talking about a lot of like theoretical stuff.
Yeah, a lot of theory.
Different types of translations, units of translation, this quest for equivalence.
Right.
It's clear that this is way more than just plugging words into a dictionary. But I'm curious, like, how does all this theory play out in the real world?
In real life.
Yeah.
You know.
The source material mentions some really interesting, like, real-world examples of translation challenges. Can we, like, dig into those?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, cool.
Remember that Spanish word brote?
Oh, brote? Yeah.
That we were talking about?
Yeah.
The source material, like, really dives into a specific scenario, a text about foot and mouth disease.
Foot and mouth disease. Okay, so we're talking about, like, scientific translation.
Yes.
I imagine precision is really important in that context.
Super important because the stakes are high when it comes to translating like scientific information.
Right.
And in this case, the challenge wasn't just finding a translation for brote. It was figuring out which English equivalent was the most accurate and appropriate depending on the specific scientific context.
Oh, so was it like brote referring to the
what was it?
Outbreak itself or like the symptoms on the animals?
Sometimes it was talking about the physical lesions.
Okay.
So rash might be the best fit.
Right.
But sometimes it was talking about the initial appearance of the virus.
Okay.
So outbreak would be more accurate.
Okay.
And then there were moments where it was describing the virus multiplying within the host. So sprouting became the most appropriate.
Wow, that's fascinating.
I know, right?
So it's like the translator needs to be a scientist.
A scientist.
And a linguist.
Yes, to get this right.
To get it right. Wow. That's, and this really highlights how, like, the unit of translation isn't fixed.
No, it's not fixed.
Right. Sometimes it's a word, sometimes it's a phrase, and the translator has to constantly be
analyzing that context.
Analyzing the context.
To make the better decision.
To make the best decision.
Yeah.
Speaking of, like, we were kind of talking about code switching.
Yeah.
I'm curious about another example
Okay.
mentioned in the source material. Something about translating the phrase working for the government.
Oh, yes. This one is it highlights how much
Yeah.
culture is intertwined with translation.
Right.
So the example involves these students
Good.
who were translating a text about the dismal job market.
Okay.
And the text mentioned that 45% of those who do find jobs actually end up working for the government.
Okay, so on the surface, that seems like a pretty
Yeah.
straightforward sentence to translate. What's the catch?
The catch is that these students were from an oil-rich Gulf state
Okay.
where government jobs are highly sought after.
Oh,
They're seen as stable, well-paying,
right.
prestigious.
So their cultural context completely changed.
Yeah, totally.
How they interpreted that sentence.
Yes.
Fun.
They were baffled as to why working for the government
Would be a bad thing. Like, their initial instinct
Yeah.
was to translate it in a way
Yeah.
that conveyed, like, a positive connotation.
That is so interesting. It just shows how easily cultural assumptions can slip into translation
Yeah.
without us even realizing it. I bet that happens
All the time.
all the time.
Yeah.
Especially like when you're translating like literature or film, where there are so many layers of cultural meaning.
So many layers. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. And it just underscores the importance of cultural sensitivity in translation.
Yeah.
Translators need to be aware of, like, not only the linguistic differences, but also the cultural values,
Right.
beliefs,
Yeah.
practices that shape how language is used
Right, right.
and understood.
So it's not just about bilingualism.
No.
It's about like biculturalism too.
Wait, culturalism, that's a great word.
Right.
Yes. And that brings us
Yeah.
to an even more complex layer. Okay, hit me.
Ideology.
Ideology. Okay,
Yeah.
so we were talking about,
Remember how Jacobson defined translation as interpretation?
interpretation.
Yeah, those interpretations are never completely neutral.
Right?
They're shaped by the translator's own worldview, their understanding of the source culture, the target audience.
So you're saying that even the most,
Yes.
like, well-intentioned translator
yes.
is inevitably, like, bringing their own baggage
They are.
to the text.
It's unavoidable.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But it's important to be aware of it.
Right. Those
Biases.
biases, yeah.
Especially when you're translating texts that deal with
Right.
sensitive topics like
Yeah.
politics,
Right.
religion,
Yeah.
social justice.
That makes me think of, like, the whole debate
Yes.
around translating the
sacred texts.
sacred texts.
Yeah.
There's so much at stake there.
Oh, I know. In terms of like interpretation.
Yeah, and how those interpretations shape, like, people's
People's beliefs.
beliefs. Yeah, exactly. And that's a great example of how translation can be, like, a site of ideological struggle.
Right.
Where different interpretations are clashing and competing.
Yeah.
The source material mentions this really provocative example,
Okay.
the metaphor of les belles infidèles.
Les belles infidèles. Well, that sounds fancy. What does it mean?
It means the beautiful unfaithful.
Oh.
And it's been used to describe translations that prioritize style and readability over strict adherence
Right.
to the source text.
So like beautiful but potentially deceptive.
Potentially, yeah.
I can see how that metaphor would be seen as like a little problematic.
Yes, because it frames free translation as feminine
Right.
and potentially untrustworthy, which reinforces gender stereotypes
Yeah.
within the field.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you wonder like about the power dynamics.
Yes.
Not just in the texts themselves.
But also in the discourse.
Yeah. Like who gets to decide what's a good translation?
Right.
Whose voices are being privileged,
Yeah.
marginalized in the process?
Those are important questions.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a second.
Okay.
Let's talk about something that's kind of like shaking things up
Ooh, yeah.
in the world of translation.
Right.
Technology.
Okay. Technology.
You mean machine translation?
Machine translator.
It's definitely a hot topic these days.
very hot topic.
But how does it actually work?
So, I mean, the early machine translation systems
Yeah.
were basically based on word-for-word substitution.
Right.
Using dictionaries,
Mm-hmm.
basic grammar rules.
I'm guessing it didn't work very well
Not so well.
because we've already established that translation is about so much more than
It is.
just swapping out words.
It's about context, culture, intent.
Right. All of that.
All the things that get lost
Right.
in a purely mechanical approach.
Right. Right.
Those early systems often produced some like hilariously bad translations.
Yeah.
But machine translation has come a long way.
Uh-huh.
We've moved from that simple word substitution to more sophisticated systems that can actually analyze sentence structure,
Okay.
identify parts of speech, even access vast databases
Oh, wow.
of text to learn language patterns.
So it's not just about dictionaries anymore.
It's not, no.
It's about teaching machines to,
Think.
more like
Human
humans.
translators, taking into account all those
The layers.
that we've been talking about.
Yeah. In a way, yes. But while machine translation has made incredible progress,
Right.
it still faces limitations.
Okay.
It can handle, like, technical documents,
Mm-hmm.
straightforward information
Okay.
pretty well,
Mm-hmm.
but it struggles with things like humor,
Oh, wow.
irony,
Right. I
metaphor.
can see that.
It can't grasp the subtleties of tone.
Or the emotional impact of language.
Right.
And it's still very much dependent on the quality of the data that
Yeah.
it's trained on.
So the big question, the one everyone's asking,
Mm-hmm.
are machines going to replace,
The million-dollar question.
are we all going to be out of jobs?
Well, I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
The answer is nuanced.
Okay.
Like most things in translation.
Right.
For tasks involving large volumes of text or highly technical language, machine translation can be a really valuable tool.
Okay.
But for now, and probably for the foreseeable future,
Right.
it's best seen as a tool for human translators, not a replacement.
Right. So rather than fearing obsolescence, translators can embrace these new technologies.
You embrace the technology.
Yeah.
See it as a partner
Yeah, a partner
in the translation process.
in the process. I like that.
Right. So instead of thinking of it as like competition,
Yeah.
think of it as collaboration.
Collaboration, yeah.
Yeah.
But what about this corpus-based approach
Oh, yeah.
that's mentioned in the source material?
The corpus.
How does that fit into all of this?
Well, corpora are basically vast collections of text
Okay.
that can be analyzed to reveal patterns
Okay.
in how language is used. Think of them as like massive digital libraries
Okay.
that provide real-world examples
Great.
of how language is actually used.
Okay. So it's like giving translators a cheat sheet
It's like a cheat sheet
Yeah.
for natural-sounding translations.
in our natural sounding translations. Cool.
I know.
So corpora can be helpful
Incredibly helpful.
for finding the right word.
The right word, the right phrase
Yeah.
in a specific context.
Yeah.
Identifying common collocations. Understanding the subtle differences
Okay.
between similar words.
It's like having a team
It is.
of like experts.
Experts.
Yeah, at your fingertips.
At your fingertips.
So with machine translation handling the basics,
Yeah.
corpora providing all this linguistic data,
Right.
it sounds like the future of translation is looking pretty bright.
It is. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we need
Okay.
to consider. The human element.
Oh, right.
Even with all these technological advancements,
Yeah.
translation remains
Yeah.
a very human.
A human endeavor.
It requires creativity,
Right.
empathy,
Yeah.
a cultural sensitivity, a profound understanding.
So in a sense, the more technology
Yeah.
advances, the more important the human
the
translator.
human translator becomes even more important.
It's about harnessing the power of technology
Yes.
while still recognizing the value
Yes.
of human expertise.
Exactly. And this brings us back
Okay.
to Jacobson's idea of translation as interpretation.
Right.
No matter how sophisticated our machines get,
Right.
they can never fully replicate
Yeah.
the human capacity
For understanding,
understanding. It's-
meaning making,
yeah,
creative expression.
right. So it's not about
It's not about
machines
Right.
versus humans.
No, it's machines and
Us
humans
and humans.
working together
Yeah.
to create translations that are not only accurate but also culturally sensitive,
Right.
nuanced,
Yeah.
engaging.
Okay. Beautifully said.
I think it's that collaboration,
Yeah.
that fusion of like human and artificial intelligence
Yeah.
that really holds the key
Right.
to unlocking the full potential of translation
In this, like, increasingly.
in this world that's becoming more and more interconnected
Yeah. Yeah.
and multilingual.
Multilingual, exactly. This has been such an eye-opening
Deep
dive. We've gone from the basic definition of translation
Yeah.
to like the cutting edge of
No,
technology.
It is
It's clear that this field is
constantly evolving.
constantly evolving, yes. And what's most exciting is that despite all of these changes,
Yeah.
the fundamental challenges
Right.
of translation remain the same.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
How to bridge the linguistic and cultural divides, how to convey meaning
Yeah.
across all these different forms of expression,
And how to use language to, like,
to build understanding,
yeah,
connection,
in a world that
in a world that often feels very, very fragmented.
fragmented.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired to
Yeah.
go out and, like, explore the world of translation
Yes.
with, like, fresh eyes.
With fresh eyes, yes.
Yeah, so before we wrap up, what's, like, one final
One fine
thought-provoking question
Yeah.
we can leave our listener with?
How about this? Next time you encounter a translation,
Okay.
take a moment to think about the invisible forces
Oh, the invisible forces, yeah.
at play. What cultural assumptions might be embedded in the text?
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Whose voice is being amplified or
Yeah.
silenced in the process?
Wow, okay.
Translation is a window
Yeah.
into a
A
world
world of
hidden meanings,
hidden meanings.
waiting to be discovered.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
That is a fantastic question. And it really brings home the point that translation is so much more than
That's so much more.
just a technical skill.
It is.
It's a window into culture, a tool for communication.
It's a lens for understanding power dynamics.
Yeah, our dynamics. And it's something that we encounter every single day,
We do.
but don't often think about.
Yeah, often take for granted.
Take it for granted, yeah.
Yeah.
So this deep dive has given me like a whole new appreciation
I'm so glad.
for the art and complexity
It is complex.
of translation.
I'm glad to hear that. And I hope it encourages our listeners
Yeah.
to approach translated texts with, like, a more critical and curious eye.
Well said.
Mm.
So on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of translation. Thanks for joining us. You know, it's amazing to think about how much goes on behind the scenes of something that we just encounter every day.
Right.
You know, I mean, how many times have we read a book in translation or watched like a film with subtitles? And we don't even really think about the choices that were made,
Yeah.
the meanings that might have like shifted along the way.
Right. It's easy to forget that there's this whole layer of interpretation
Yeah.
between us and the original.
Yeah, and that interpretation, like we were talking about, is influenced by language,
By so many
culture, ideology, even technology.
All of those things, yeah.
I have to admit, before this deep dive, I kind of saw machine translation
Yeah.
as this like looming threat.
Right.
Like it was going to make human translators obsolete.
Yeah.
But I see it more as like an evolving partnership,
Yeah, I do too.
you know, each side
Yeah.
complementing the other.
Absolutely. I think that's a much healthier way to look at it.
Yeah,
You know, machine translation can be a really powerful tool for increasing efficiency,
right.
accessibility,
Yeah.
but it can't replace the human touch,
They-
that nuanced understanding of language and culture.
Right. That makes a translation.
Sing,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like that old saying, to err is human.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it's also to excel,
Yes.
right? Machines might be great at,
Yeah.
like crunching data and finding patterns,
Right.
but they can't replicate that.
That creativity,
Yes.
empathy
Yeah.
that human translators bring
Yeah.
to the table.
So the future of translation really lies in,
Collaboration.
yeah,
Finding ways for humans and machines to work together
I agree.
to create translations that are both accurate
Mm-hmm.
and engaging, faithful to the original,
Yeah.
but still resonating with
Forget the
target audience.
target audience, yeah.
Yes.
So what does this all mean
Well,
for
right.
someone who's not a professional translator?
That's a great question.
Why should they care?
I think the biggest takeaway is that translation is so much more
Yeah.
than just like a technical skill.
Right.
It's a way of thinking, a way of engaging with the world, a way of understanding the power of language.
You know, now that you mention it, I think this deep dive has actually made me
Oh, cool.
like a more critical reader and viewer.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I'm paying more attention to. Like the subtleties of language, the choices that the translators made, the
Yeah.
ways that those choices shape my understanding of the text.
I love that. That's exactly the kind of awareness
Yeah.
that we were hoping to spark
I'll
with
keep
this
in
deep
mind.
dive, because once you start seeing translation as this active process
Yeah.
of interpretation,
Right.
you realize that it's happening all around us,
It is, yeah.
shaping our perceptions of the world
Yeah.
in really subtle but profound ways.
It's not just about understanding different languages.
No.
It's about understanding,
Different cultures, different perspectives,
Yeah.
different ways of seeing the world.
and that's like a crucial skill to cultivate
It is.
in today's world.
It is. It's becoming increasingly more and more important.
Yeah. Well said.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of translation, what is like one final
And we're final.
piece of advice you would give our listeners?
I would say embrace the ambiguity.
Ooh, embrace the ambiguity.
Don't be afraid to question translations, to compare different versions,
Oh, yeah.
to dig deeper
Yeah.
into those layers of meaning
The layers.
that lie beneath the surface.
Yeah, yeah.
Translation is a journey, not a destination.
Ooh,
And the more curious and open-minded you are,
yeah.
the more rewarding that journey will be.
That's beautiful. And I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I think so too.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating exploration of translation.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We hope you learned something new and maybe even changed the way you think about the words we use and the world we inhabit.